He smiled at me like I was a smudge on crystal, something you wipe away before the real guests arrive. Then he leaned in and spoke in Old French, slow and elegant, so everyone could enjoy my confusion without understanding a word. The room laughed on cue. My sister froze, and my mother looked ready to beg me to apologize. I did not flinch or smile. I let the silence stretch until it started to scare him. My name is Ivy Lewis, and I was standing in a room that smelled of orchids, beeswax, and money that had never been asked to apologize. The Marrow House was not the sort of place you found by accident. It was a limestone fortress tucked away on a quiet street in Washington. D.C., the kind of establishment where membership fees were whispered rather than printed, and where the air conditioning was set to a temperature that required cashmere. Regardless of the season, I stood near a velvet-draped pillar, holding a glass of sparkling water I had been nursing for 45 minutes. I was trying to make myself as two-dimensional as possible, a piece of background scenery that would not distract from the main attraction. Tonight was not about me. Tonight was a coronation masquerading as an engagement party. My sister, Sloane, was the jewel in the center of the room, shimmering in a silk gown that likely cost more than my entire student loan debt. Standing next to her, with a hand resting possessively on the small of her back, was Lucien Varga. Lucien was the heir to a venture capital dynasty that treated national borders like minor suggestions. He was handsome in the way a shark is handsome, sleek, predatory, and perfectly adapted to his environment. He did not just attend a party, he consumed it. He moved through the crowd of 300 guests with the easy arrogance of a man who knew the music would stop the moment he ceased conducting. I watched Sloane. She was smiling, but the smile did not quite reach her eyes. It was a practiced expression, one she had been refining for the last 6 months. Every time Lucien leaned down to whisper something in her ear, her posture stiffened imperceptibly, a micro-flinch that only a sister would notice. She looked terrifyingly beautiful and utterly trapped. I checked the time on the grandfather clock across the room. It was nearly 9 in the evening. I just had to survive 2 more hours. 2 hours of dodging pitying glances from my mother's friends. 2 hours of pretending I did not hear the whispers about Ivy Lewis, the academic failure who lived in a shoebox apartment in Arlington. The room was filled with the sort of people who shape economies. There were senators, tech moguls, and a significant delegation of European investors Lucien was courting for his latest expansion. I recognized Etienne Moreau among them, a silver-haired man with the bearing of a retired general, sipping his wine with a critical eye. Lucien clinked his spoon against his champagne flute. The crystal rang out, a sharp, commanding sound that sliced through the murmur of conversation. The room fell silent instantly. Faces turned toward him like flowers turning toward a cold sun. "Friends, family, distinguished guests," Lucien began, his voice smooth, projected perfectly without a microphone. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate the union of 2 families. Sloane has brought a light into my life that I did not know was missing." It was a perfect speech. It was charming, humble, and completely hollow. He spoke of love, but his eyes were scanning the room, counting the net worth of the attendees. When his gaze landed on me, however, the warmth evaporated, his eyes narrowed slightly, a predator spotting a limp in the herd. "Of course," Lucien continued, his smile taking on a sharper edge. "We are also joined by Sloane's sister, Ivy, our resident scholar." A ripple of polite, uncertain laughter moved through the crowd. My mother, standing near the front, stiffened. She shot me a look that begged me to remain statuesque. Lucien gestured for me to come closer. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. I hesitated, then stepped forward, moving out of the shadows of the pillar. The spotlight felt physical, a heavy weight pressing down on my shoulders. I was wearing a navy dress that was appropriate, modest, and 5 years old. Amidst the couture surrounding me, I felt like a rough draft in a room full of glossy prints. "Ivy is a student of languages," Lucien announced to the room. his tone dropping into a patronizing register usually reserved for children or slow pets. She studies the old ways, dead words for dead worlds. Isn't that right, Ivy? I study historical linguistics. Lucian, I said, my voice steady, despite the rapid thumping of my heart. Fascinating, he drawled. He turned back to the European delegates, specifically eyeing Monsieur Moreau. I have always believed that to truly command the future, one must master the past. I spent a summer in Provence, immersing myself in the local history. It is a passion of mine. He was performing. I realized then that I was merely a prop in his play. He needed to demonstrate his cultural depth to the investors, and I was the convenient foil. Then, he did it. He shifted his stance, puffed out his chest, and looked directly at me. "Tell me, Ivy," he said. But this time, he did not speak in English. He switched to Old French, not modern French, not the language you hear in Paris cafes today. He was attempting to speak the langue d'oil, the medieval dialect of the northern courts, the language of 12th century legal registers and chivalric romances. It was the language I had spent the last 7 years of my life dissecting, breathing, and translating. He switched to Old French and said, "Tell me, little sister," he intoned, his pronunciation thick and overly theatrical. "Could you bring us more wine? It is all you are good for." The room went quiet. Most of the American guests did not understand the words, but they understood the tone. It was the universal tone of dismissal. It was the sound of a master addressing a servant. Lucien chuckled, a low, resonant sound. He looked around the room, inviting them to share in the joke. "Just a little family dialect," he said in English, winking at a venture capitalist from New York. "I asked her if she's enjoying the party, but the dialect is quite tricky. I doubt she caught it." The guests laughed. They laughed because Lucien Varga was worth billions of dollars. They laughed because the champagne was free, and the discomfort of a poor relation was entertaining. My mother laughed, too. A high, brittle sound that sounded like glass breaking. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Laugh. Just laugh. Don't ruin this." Sloane was the only one not laughing. She looked from Lucien to me, her face pale. She knew I spoke French, but she did not know the extent of my studies. She only knew that her fiancé was using a language she did not understand to make her sister look small. I stood perfectly still. I did not smile. I did not frown. I let the laughter wash over me, cold and sticky. Lucien, emboldened by the crowd's approval, decided he had not drawn enough blood yet. He turned back to me, his grin widening. He wanted to see me crumble. He wanted to see me confused, stammering, looking for a translation that would never come. He leaned in closer, his voice projecting to the back of the room. He spoke again in that butchered, arrogant old French. "Your silence is the only precious thing you own. Go back to the shadows, peasant." He used the word paysan, not as a descriptor of rural life, but as a slur, a way to mark me as dirt beneath the floorboards of his magnificent life. The laughter grew louder. A few of the foreign delegates shifted in their seats, looking uncomfortable. They recognized the aggression, even if the specific medieval vocabulary was lost on some of them, but not all of them. Etienne Moreau had stopped drinking. He was watching Lucien with a look of intense curiosity, his glass hovering halfway to his mouth. Lucien turned his back on me, dismissing me, ready to return to his adoration. He thought it was over. He thought I was the smudge on the crystal, wiped away. I took a breath. The air in the room felt thin, recycled, and insufficient. I thought about the 3 years I had spent buried in the archives, the dust of centuries under my fingernails, the quiet dignity of translating voices that had been silenced by time. I thought about the debt my mother had accrued, the leverage Lucien held over our family, the way he looked at Sloane like she was an acquisition. I could walk away. I could go back to the corner. I could let him win. That is what Ivy Lewis does. She survives. She stays invisible. But the silence stretched too long. It was not the silence of submission anymore. It was the silence of a bowstring being pulled back to its breaking point. "Monsieur Varga," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room with the clarity of a bell. Lucien stopped. He turned slowly, an amused smirk playing on his lips. He expected an apology in English. He expected a stammer. I looked him directly in the eyes. I did not blink. Si vous souhaitez insulter ma lignée, I began, speaking in flawless, historically accurate Old French, the vowels rounded and resonant, the cadence musical and precise. Ayez au moins la décence de maîtriser la grammaire de vos supérieurs. If you wish to insult my lineage, have at least the decency to master the grammar of your superiors. The room dropped into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the HVAC system 3 floors up. Lucien's smile faltered. His eyebrows drew together. He understood enough to know I was speaking the language, but he was struggling to keep up with the speed and the archaic syntax I was wielding like a scalpel. I took a step forward. I was not the poor relation anymore. I was the expert in the room, and he was the student who had come to class unprepared. Vous avez utilisé le cas sujet pour un objet direct, I continued, my voice calm, almost bored. Et votre prononciation des voyelles nasales trahit une éducation achetée plutôt qu'acquise. You use the subject case for a direct object, and your pronunciation of the nasal vowels betrays an education bought rather than acquired. I saw the color drain from his face. It was not just that I understood him. It was that I was correcting him, in front of the bank, in front of the investors, in front of the people he needed to impress with his worldly sophistication. De plus, I added, delivering the final strike. Le terme paysanne implique une relation féodale que vous n'avez ni le sang ni le titre pour imposer. Ici, nous sommes simplement des invités. Furthermore, the term peasant implies a feudal relationship you have neither the blood nor the title to enforce. Here, we are simply guests. I finished and let my hands clasp loosely in front of me, returning to my posture of neutral observation. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. The insult hung in the air, shimmering and lethal. Then, a sound broke the paralysis. It was a cough, a single, stifled cough of laughter. It came from the head table. Etienne Moreau had lowered his glass. He was looking at me, and for the first time all night. He looked like he was seeing something real. He nodded, a tiny, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. Lucien looked at Moreau, then he looked at me. The charm was gone. The host mask had cracked, revealing something ugly and panicked underneath. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man who had reached for a weapon and found only air. Sloane was staring at me. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide. It was a look of shock, yes, but underneath the shock, something else was kindling, a flicker of recognition. My mother looked like she was about to faint. She gripped the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white. The silence was no longer heavy, it was electric. I had not just replied. I had rewritten the hierarchy of the room in 30 seconds. Lucien's fists clenched at his sides. I saw the vein in his temple pulse. He was going to retaliate. He was going to try to crush me. But for this moment, right now, he was powerless. He was a tourist in a land where I was the queen. I held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to apologize, refusing to be the smudge. But before the first murmur of shock could ripple through the crowd, before Lucien could scramble to reconstruct his shattered ego, my mind pulled away from the chandeliered room. The golden light faded, the smell of orchids dissolved, and the floor dropped out from under me. The memory of how I ended up in this lion's den rushed forward, pulling me back to the beginning, back to the apartment in Arlington, back to the quiet before the storm. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them, I was no longer in the Marrow House. I was 3 days in the past, and my phone was ringing. The entry to the Marrow House was not a door, it was a filtration system. I stepped out of the cool evening air and into a vestibule that felt like the inside of a jewelry box, lined with dark mahogany and lit by sconces that cast a golden, forgiving light. But there was nothing forgiving about the woman standing behind the podium. She was young, perhaps 22, with skin that looked like it had been airbrushed and a headset that blinked with a tiny, aggressive blue light. She did not look at my face. She looked at my shoes first. Then she let her gaze travel up the length of my navy dress, pausing at the hem, the waist, and finally the neckline. It was a clinical assessment, the way a customs agent scans luggage for contraband. She was checking for loose threads, for scuffs, for anything that might contaminate the sterile perfection of the club. "Name?" she asked. She did not smile. Smiling was evidently a service reserved for members, not guests. "Ivy Lewis," I said. She tapped a finger against a tablet screen, her acrylic nail making a sharp click. She frowned, scrolled, and then frowned again. "ID," she said. I hesitated. I had never been asked for identification at a private party before. "My sister is the bride-to-be," I said, keeping my voice low. "Sloane Lewis." "ID," she repeated, her tone flat. She did not care who my sister was. She only cared that I did not look like the sort of person who belonged on the list. I opened my clutch and retrieved my driver's license. She took it, holding it by the very edge as if it were sticky. She compared the photo to my face, looking back and forth 3 times. The implication was clear. She was deciding if the tired, pale woman in front of her was actually the same person as the tired, pale woman in the plastic card. "You are on the supplemental list," she said finally, handing the card back. She pressed a button under the podium, and the heavy double doors behind her unlocked with a magnetic thud. "Coat check is to the left. Do not take photos inside. The Marrow House values privacy above all else." "Thank you," I said. She had already stopped looking at me. She was looking past my shoulder at a couple walking up the path behind me, her face instantly transforming into a mask of radiant welcome. I pushed through the doors and entered the aquarium. That was the only way to describe it. The main ballroom was a cavernous space with a vaulted ceiling. Sealed off from the grit and noise of the city, the air here was different. It was heavy, cool, and scented with a specific mixture of white orchids, beeswax polish, and something metallic, the smell of money that has never apologized to anyone. It was a sensory assault of expensive textures. The curtains were heavy velvet, the floors were inlaid marble, and the chandeliers overhead dripped with crystals that fractured the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. The sound was the first thing that hit me. It was a low, continuous roar of conversation, punctured by the crystalline clinking of glasses and the soft thrum of a string quartet playing somewhere in the corner. It was the sound of power relaxing. A server in a white tuxedo jacket appeared at my elbow. He held a silver tray of champagne flutes. He looked at me, paused for a fraction of a second, and then angled the tray slightly away as he passed, moving toward a group of men in dark suits. It was a subtle gesture, seamless and practiced. He had assessed my net worth in a glance and decided I was not the target audience for the vintage cuvée. I did not mind. I preferred clarity. I navigated the room, looking for my table. The seating chart was a map of social hierarchy, drawn in calligraphy on linen paper. The head table, a long banquet-style arrangement on a raised platform, was the throne room. That was where the Vargas sat, where the senators sat, where Sloane would sit. Radiating out from there were the tables for the inner circle, partners, major investors, old family friends. I kept walking. I passed the inner circle. I passed the secondary tier of business associates. I passed the tables near the windows. I finally found my place card at table 19. It was located in the far back corner of the room, directly next to the swinging doors that led to the service corridor. Every time a server entered or exited, a gust of kitchen air, smelling of seared steak and dish soap, hit the back of my neck. The noise of the kitchen staff shouting orders was a constant, rhythmic percussion beneath the string quartet. I pulled out my chair and sat down. The other seats at table 19 were empty for now. I suspected this was the table for the miscellaneous obligations, the distant cousins, the former tutors, the people who had to be invited but did not need to be seen. From my vantage point, I had a clear view of the entire ecosystem. It was like watching a nature documentary where the predators wore silk and the prey smiled while being eaten. I saw the Varga family holding court near the center of the room. Gideon Varga, the patriarch, was a man who looked like he had been carved out of gray ice. He was tall and lean, with silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He stood with one hand in his pocket, listening to a senator speak. Gideon did not nod. He did not smile. He simply stared, his eyes unblinking, absorbing information. He had the stillness of a reptile waiting for a fly. I had read about him in the financial sections of the newspapers I used to translate. Gideon Varga did not build companies. He surgically disassembled them and sold the parts for profit. He was looking at the room not as a host, but as an auditor. Beside him was Celeste Varga. If Gideon was the ice, Celeste was the scalpel. She was wearing a gown of hammered gold that looked like armor. Her hair was a blonde helmet of perfection, not a single strand daring to move. She was smiling, but it was a terrifying expression. It was a smile that showed too many teeth, a smile that said, "I know exactly how much you are worth, and I am unimpressed." She moved through the guests, touching arms and offering cheeks for air kisses, leaving a wake of nervous energy behind her. I watched her approach a young woman, perhaps a junior associate's wife, who was wearing a dress that was slightly too bright for the season. Celeste leaned in, whispered something, and patted the woman's hand. The woman's face crumbled. She looked down at her dress, mortified. Celeste beamed and moved on. Her work done. I took a sip of water from the crystal goblet in front of me. I felt invisible. It was a familiar feeling, one I had worn like a cloak for the last 3 years. The guests moved around me, their eyes sliding over me as if I were a piece of furniture. I was useful for filling the chair, for making the room look full, for holding the scene together, but I was not worth addressing directly. A man in a tuxedo backed into my chair, bumping my shoulder. He did not turn around. He did not apologize. He simply adjusted his footing and continued his conversation about interest rates. To him, I was an obstacle, not a person. I scanned the room again, looking for Sloane. She was not there yet. The bride was being held back for a grand entrance. My gaze drifted to a table near the front, but off to the side. It was occupied by a group of 6 men and 2 women who looked distinct from the rest of the American crowd. They were quieter. Their suits were cut differently, narrower lapels, darker fabrics. They did not have the loud, booming laughter of the DOC power brokers. They sat with a relaxed intensity, observing the room with critical eyes. These were the European delegates, the expansion Lucian was so desperate to secure. One man sat at the center of the group. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a beard that was neatly trimmed and gray. He was not looking at Gideon or Celeste. He was not looking at the chandeliers. He was looking at me. I froze. It was Etienne Moreau. I recognized him from the dossier photos I had seen on financial news sites, but in person, he had a gravity that pixels could not capture. He held a glass of red wine, his fingers long and elegant around the stem. He was not staring with the predatory assessment of the check-in girl or the dismissal of the other guests. He was looking at me with recognition. It was a look of puzzlement, as if he were trying to place a melody he had heard a long time ago. I lowered my eyes, breaking the contact. My heart hammered against my ribs. Why would Etienne Moreau look at me? I was nobody. I was a translator of agricultural manuals. I was the sister in the navy dress near the kitchen door. Perhaps I reminded him of a waitress he once knew, or perhaps he was just bored. And I was the only anomaly in a room full of clones. A commotion at the entrance drew my attention away from the delegates. My mother had arrived. Dana Lewis stood in the archway, pausing just a little too long, waiting for a hush that did not come. She was wearing a dress that was spectacular and entirely wrong. It was a flowing, beaded gown in a shade of emerald green that clashed violently against the understated blacks and creams of the other guests. It was a dress for a gala, for a red carpet, not for an engagement party in a conservative dance club. She looked frantic. Her eyes darted around the room, wide and shiny with a mixture of excitement and terror. And then there were the jewels. Around her neck hung a necklace of diamonds and emeralds that caught the light and threw it back with desperate brilliance. It was new. I knew every piece of jewelry my mother owned. I had appraised most of them during the crisis 3 years ago. This was not a family heirloom. This was a recent acquisition. It sat on her collarbone like a shackle. She spotted me in the corner and hurried over, her heels clicking rapidly on the marble. She navigated the maze of tables with a frantic energy, nearly knocking over a waiter. "Ivy," she hissed as she reached my table. She did not sit down. She gripped the back of the empty chair next to me, her knuckles white. "Why are you sitting back here? You look like you are in time out." "This is where my card is. Mother," I said, keeping my voice even. She glanced at the kitchen doors and winced. "Oh, well, I am sure it is just a mistake, a logistical error." She reached out and smoothed a stray hair on my head, her fingers trembling slightly. "You look very sensible. That is good. We want sensible tonight. You look beautiful." "Mom," I said, lying gently. She touched the heavy necklace at her throat. "Do you like it? Lucian gave it to me, yesterday. He said it was a welcome gift. Can you imagine? A welcome gift." Her voice was high and breathy, the voice she used when she was trying to convince herself that everything was wonderful. "It is very generous," I said. "He is so generous," she repeated, the words tumbling out like a spell she had to keep reciting to keep the demons at bay. "He is saving us. Ivy, you know that, right? He is making everything right. We just have to be grateful. We have to show him we belong here." She looked around the room, her eyes hungry and scared. She looked at the chandeliers, the waiters, the people who ignored her. She wanted this world so badly, it physically pained her. She wanted the safety of it. She wanted the immunity that came with that level of wealth. "They are being so generous," she whispered again, gripping my shoulder now. Her nails dug into my skin through the fabric of my dress. "Don't ruin this, Ivy. Please, I know you get opinions. I know you think you are smarter than everyone else sometimes. But just for tonight, be simple, be sweet. Do not correct anyone. Do not bring up the past. Just smile." "I am not going to ruin anything," I said. "Good," she said. She let go of my shoulder and took a breath. Composing herself, she adjusted the emerald necklace, centering it. "Okay, I have to go say hello to Celeste. She is over there. She looks terrifying, doesn't she? But she is family now. Family." She said the word family like it was a life raft. "Go," I said. "I will be fine here." Dana took one last look at me, a look that was a mixture of love and disappointment, and then turned to march into the fray. I watched her approach Celeste Varga. I saw Celeste turn, her smile tightening just a fraction of a millimeter. I saw the way Celeste's eyes flicked to the emerald necklace, the necklace her son had bought, and then up to my mother's eager face. It was not a meeting of equals. It was a meeting between a shark and a seal that the shark had decided to keep as a pet. I looked away. I could not bear to watch my mother beg for scraps of validation. The server appeared again, placing a basket of bread rolls on the table. He did not offer me wine. He did not offer me water. He just dropped the bread and vanished back into the kitchen. I picked up a roll. It was cold. I looked across the room again and found Etienne Moreau still watching. He had not moved. When our eyes met this time, he did not look away. He raised his glass slightly, a millimeter of acknowledgement, and then took a slow sip. The message was unclear, but the feeling it gave me was precise. I was being observed. I was being measured. And unlike the check-in girl or the Varga parents, Etienne Moreau was not measuring my net worth. He was measuring something else entirely. The string quartet stopped playing. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush fell over the room, starting from the front and rippling back to my exile near the kitchen. The double doors at the far end of the ballroom opened. Sloane was here, and as the room turned to look at her, I felt the air pressure drop. The performance was about to begin, and I was sitting in the back row, waiting for the curtain to fall on my head, Sloane moved across the room like a beam of light refracted through a prism, scattering brilliance in every direction. She was wearing a gown of hammered silk that clung to her frame like a second skin. The color of champagne poured over ice. Her hair was swept up in a loose, romantic chignon that had likely taken a stylist 3 hours to make look effortless. As she walked, the crowd parted for her, a red sea of tuxedos and designer crepe yielding to the bride-to-be. She was smiling. It was a dazzling, megawatt smile that engaged the eyes of every person she passed. She accepted kisses on the cheek, squeezed hands, and laughed at jokes she could not possibly have heard over the din of the room. To the casual observer, to the senators, the investors, and the hangers-on, she looked like the happiest woman in Washington. She looked like a fairy tale come to life, but I was not a casual observer. I was her sister, and I was watching a tragedy in slow motion. I stood up as she approached the center of the room, my hands gripping the back of my chair. I watched the way her body moved, alone. Sloane had a natural, fluid grace, a way of walking that was bouncy and unself-conscious. But the moment Lucian stepped away from his father and moved toward her, her physics changed. It was subtle, a shift so microscopic that you would miss it if you were not looking for it. As Lucian reached her side, Sloane's spine straightened by a fraction of an inch. Her shoulders, which had been relaxed, locked into a pose of perfect posture. The hand that had been swinging freely at her side suddenly found a purpose, clutching her clutch bag as if it were an anchor. Lucian did not grab her. He did not pull her. He simply placed a hand on the small of her back. It looked affectionate, a possessive gesture of a loving fiancé guiding his partner through the crowd. But I saw the reaction. Sloane stopped mid-breath. She did not lean into his touch. She braced herself against it. They began to move through the room as a unit. I watched them with the analytical intensity I usually reserved for decoding syntax in a damaged manuscript. I looked for the grammar of their relationship, every time someone spoke to them. Sloane did not answer immediately. She paused. It was a pause of less than 1 second, but it was there. She would glance at Lucian's profile, checking the weather of his expression before she allowed herself to respond. If Lucian was smiling, she laughed. If Lucian looked bored, she kept her answer brief. She was editing herself in real time, trimming away the parts of her personality that might take up too much space or draw the wrong kind of attention. She was pivoting when he pivoted. If he turned his body 45 degrees to the left to address a donor, she swiveled instantly to match his angle. Like a dancer following a lead she was terrified to step on. It was not partnership. It was mimicry, born of survival instinct. My stomach churned. This was not the Sloane who used to sing off-key karaoke in dive bars. This was not the Sloane who would argue passionately about which reality TV star deserved to win. This was a hollowed-out shell, polished to a high shine and filled with whatever Lucian Varga decided should be inside her that day. Lucian steered her toward the head table, but then Sloane said something to him. I saw her gesture vaguely toward the back of the room, toward the service doors, toward me. Lucian frowned. He looked at his watch, a heavy platinum piece that probably cost more than my parents' first house. He said something brief, tapped her on the arm, 2 sharp taps, like a trainer correcting a dog, and then nodded. He turned to speak to a waiter. Leaving her free for a moment, Sloane began to thread her way toward table 19. As she got closer, the mask slipped. The megawatt smile faded, replaced by a look of sheer exhaustion. Up close, I could see the tension in her jaw, the way the makeup was expertly applied to hide the dark circles under her eyes. She looked brittle, as if a strong gust of wind or a loud noise would shatter her into 1,000 pieces. "Ivy," she breathed as she reached me. She did not hug me. She reached out and gripped my hands, her fingers ice cold and trembling. "Sloane," I said, keeping my voice low. "You look beautiful." "Don't," she said. The word came out sharp, almost a hiss. She looked over her shoulder, checking where Lucian was. He was still occupied with the waiter, but his head was turned slightly in our direction. He was monitoring the room even while he was not looking at it. Sloane turned back to me. her eyes wide and desperate. Ivy, listen to me. Thank you for coming. I know you didn't want to. I know this is a lot. It is fine, I said. I am here for you. Then do something for me, she whispered. She squeezed my hands so hard it hurt. Please, just stay in the background tonight. Do not talk to Gideon. Do not talk to the investors. And for God's sake, do not try to talk to Lucian about anything real. Just eat dinner, smile, and go home. The words hit me like a physical blow. The air in the room seemed to vanish, leaving me in a vacuum of déjà vu. I knew this tone. I had heard this exact cadence, this exact pitch of panicked pleading. 3 years ago, it was the voice on the phone that night in Lyon. Mom did it again. It is bad this time. Please come home. It was the voice of a woman who was drowning and was begging me not to make waves because the water was already up to her nose. Sloane, I said, stepping closer. What is going on? You are shaking. I am fine, she lied. I am just nervous. It is a big night. There is a lot riding on this. Lucian's expansion. Everything depends on these European delegates. He is under a lot of pressure. He is under pressure? I asked, looking at her terrified eyes. Sloane, you look like you're about to face a firing squad. She flinched. Stop it. Don't analyze me. I don't need Big Sister Ivy right now. I need Invisible Ivy. Can you do that? Can you just be invisible for once? Her eyes were wet. She was begging me to erase myself. She believed that if I was quiet enough, if I was small enough, the monster wouldn't notice us. She thought she could manage him if all the variables were controlled. And right now, I was an uncontrolled variable. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to drag her out the service door, push her into a taxi, and take her back to Arlington where we could eat cheap takeout and she could breathe. But I looked at her face, and I saw the terror there. It was deep, entrenched terror. If I made a scene now, I wouldn't be saving her. I would be punishing her. Okay, I said softly. Okay, Sloane, I will be invisible. I promise. Her shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. Just, thank you. She pulled her hands away and smoothed her dress. She took a breath, resetting the mask. She was preparing to go back into the performance. I looked past her, toward the center of the room. Lucian had finished with the waiter. He was standing perfectly still, looking directly at us. He was not smiling. He was checking his watch again. He was counting. He was timing how long she was away from his side. He was measuring the duration of her autonomy. He is watching, I whispered. Sloane stiffened. She didn't look back. She knew. She felt his gaze like heat on her skin. I have to go, she said. But before she could move, a burst of noise erupted from the kitchen doors behind me. A server backed out, carrying a heavy tray of appetizers. Another server followed him. Holding the door open, they were whispering urgently, their voices low but audible over the music because I was sitting so close. I am telling you, man, be careful with the wine service at the head table. The first server muttered, Do not pour until the glass is empty, exactly empty. Why? Is he picky? The second one asked. Picky? The first server let out a harsh, incredulous huff. He fired Marcus last week, just snapped his fingers and had security drag him out. What did Marcus do? Spill something? No, the first server said, and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper that chilled my blood. Lucian told him to move a table. Marcus said, I am sorry, sir, but the fire marshal says we cannot block that exit. He said no. That was it. He said no to a request. Jesus, the second server breathed. Yeah. Lucian didn't even raise his voice. He just said, You are done. And then he made sure the agency blacklisted him. Marcus cannot get a gig anywhere in D.C. now. The guy destroys you if you embarrass him. My stomach dropped through the floor. It wasn't just that Lucian was controlling. It wasn't just that he was arrogant. It was that he viewed autonomy as an offense. He punished resistance with total annihilation. He fired someone for saying no. Suddenly, Sloane's fear had a shape, It wasn't vague anxiety about a wedding, it was the specific, calculated fear of a woman who knew that one wrong move, one word of dissent, could result in her life being dismantled. She wasn't just marrying him, she was hostage to his goodwill. I looked at Sloane. She hadn't heard the servers. She was too focused on Lucian. But I had. And now the pieces of the puzzle were locking together with a terrifying click. The debt he paid off, the house he bought for Mom, the clothes, the jewelry. It wasn't generosity, it was purchase. He had bought the rights to our family. And he expected the product to behave. "Sloane," I said, my voice urgent now. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" she asked, distracted. "Lucian, There you are," a voice boomed. Smooth and dark as velvet, Lucian had arrived. I hadn't heard him approach. He moved with the silent, predatory grace of a large cat. One moment he was across the room, and the next he was standing right beside us, invading our space, sucking the oxygen out of the corner. He didn't look at me. He looked only at Sloane. "Darling," he said, "you have been gone for 3 minutes. The Moreaus are asking for you. It is rude to leave our guests waiting." His tone was conversational, pleasant even, but the words were blades. 3 minutes. He had timed it. Rude? He was scolding her. "I am so sorry." "Lucian," Sloane said instantly. Her voice went up an octave, into that breathless, pleasing register. "I just wanted to say hi to Ivy. I lost track of time." "Time is the one thing we cannot afford to lose tonight," Lucian said. He finally turned his gaze to me. His eyes were the color of slate, cold and impenetrable. He looked at my navy dress, my pulled-back hair, my hands resting on the tablecloth. He smiled, but it was a smile that didn't involve any muscles above his nose. "Ivy," he said, "good of you to make it. I trust the service table is comfortable. We wanted to make sure you were near the action." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen doors. It was a deliberate insult. He had seated me next to the trash and the noise because that was where he thought I belonged. "It is fine. Lucien," I said. "Thank you for inviting me." "We could hardly have a family celebration without the whole family," he said, "even the parts that are usually hidden away." He reached out and placed his hand on Sloane's back again. This time, I saw his fingers curl slightly, gripping the silk of her dress, gripping the flesh beneath it. It was a claim, mine. "Come, Sloane," he said. "Etienne wants to discuss the honeymoon. He has a villa in Tuscany he thinks we should borrow." "That sounds wonderful," Sloane said. She turned to go with him. She had to. But before she turned completely, she looked back at me one last time. The expression on her face was not joy. It was not relief that I was there. It was a stark, terrified warning. Her eyes bored into mine, communicating a message that was louder than any scream. Don't make him notice you. Don't speak. Don't move. Don't give him a reason to do to you what he did to Marcus. Lucian guided her away, his hand firm on her back, steering her toward the light, toward the music, toward the head table, where he would display her like a trophy he had won at a carnival. I sat back down in my chair. My legs felt weak. The server who had been gossiping came over to my table. He poured water into my glass, his hand shaking slightly. He looked at me, and then he looked at the retreating figure of Lucien Varga. We shared a fleeting look of mutual understanding, the camaraderie of the powerless. "Champagne, miss?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "Just water." I needed to keep a clear head. I watched Sloane take her seat at the head table. She smoothed her napkin over her lap. She laughed at something Gideon Varga said. She looked perfect, but I knew the truth now. The invisible sister had seen the strings. Lucian leaned over and whispered something to Sloane. She nodded eagerly, too eagerly. He patted her hand. I touched the small book in my clutch. The Proverbs, Ayez pitié du pauvre, car le riche a ses propres démons. Pity the poor. For the rich have their own demons. Lucien Varga didn't have demons. He was the demon. And I was sitting 20 feet away, armed with nothing but a vocabulary he thought was dead, and a sister I had failed to save once before. I took a sip of water. It was cold. The dinner was about to start. The speeches were coming. I promised Sloane I would be invisible. I promised I would stay in the background. But as I watched Lucian smile at the room, a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, I felt a familiar heat rising in my chest. It was the same heat I felt when I translated a court case from 1312 where a peasant was hanged for stealing a loaf of bread from a bishop. It was the heat of injustice. I would stay invisible, for now. But if he came for me, if he tried to treat me like he treated Marcus, or Sloane, or my mother, I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. I watched him pick up his spoon and tap it against his glass. The sound rang out. Sharp and commanding, the execution was beginning. The air at table 19 had become unbreathable. It was not just the smell of the seared scallops arriving from the kitchen or the heavy, cloying scent of the floral arrangements. It was the weight of the performance. Watching Sloane dissolve into a prop for Lucian's ambition was physically painful. Like watching a bird hit a window pane over and over again. I needed oxygen. I needed a moment where my face did not have to arrange itself into a mask of polite gratitude. I stood up, smoothing the napkin onto the table. The server who had poured my water gave me a brief nod, a silent permission to abandon my post. I slipped through the gap between the tables, moving toward a side corridor that I hoped led to a restroom or a terrace, anywhere that was not this room. The corridor was dimly lit, lined with portraits of dead men who had likely owned railroads or steel mills. The noise of the party faded instantly, replaced by the hum of the building's ventilation and the sound of my own heels on the plush runner. It was cooler here. I took a deep breath, leaning against the wainscoting, trying to slow the racing of my heart. Then I heard a voice. It was sharp, jagged, and stripped of all the velvet smoothness that had been on display in the ballroom. "I do not care what the timeline is. You tell them we are ready now." I froze. I knew that voice. It was Lucian. He was around the corner, in a small alcove likely intended for private phone calls. He was not speaking to a guest. He was speaking into his phone, and he was pacing. I could hear the aggressive slap of his dress shoes against the floorboards. I should have turned back. I should have walked away. But the tone of his voice held me there. It was not the tone of a billionaire celebrating his engagement. It was the tone of a man standing on a ledge, looking down at a drop that could kill him. "Listen to me," Lucian hissed. "The Moreau Consortium signs tonight, or the expansion dies. Do you understand? We are leveraged to the hilt. If Etienne walks out of here without putting ink on that paper, we are looking at a liquidity crisis that will make 1929 look like a picnic." I pressed myself flat against the wall. The numbers he was discussing were not abstract. He was talking about the collapse of an empire. 700 million, Lucian said. "We need a bridge of $700 million just to cover the operational costs in Brussels. If Moreau smells blood, he will pull the plug. He is old school. He cares about ethics and stability. So we give him stability. We give him the show." My breath caught in my throat. $700 million. He wasn't just expanding. He was drowning. The engagement party, the champagne, the diamonds on my mother's neck. It was all a facade. It was a stage set built to convince Etienne Moreau that the Varga Empire was solid, when in reality, it was rotting from the inside out. Lucian stopped pacing. There was a pause, as if the person on the other end was speaking. Then Lucian replied, his voice lower, more dangerous. "The contracts are fine. They are boilerplate. We use the new international compliance standards. The language is watertight. I checked the penalty clause and the language compliance sections. It is standard." I stiffened. Conformité linguistique. Language compliance. It was a specific phrase. In the world of high-level international contracts, especially those bridging American capital and European regulation, language compliance was the bedrock. It ensured that the legal definitions in English matched the binding definitions in French, German, or Italian. It was the area of law where history, linguistics, and corporate strategy intersected. Lucian continued, switching to a rapid-fire legal shorthand that most people would find impenetrable. The framework is based on the Harrow-Lewis protocols. It is the gold standard for cross-border liability. Moreau trusts that framework. He thinks it guarantees transparency, as long as he believes the definitions hold up. He signs, "My blood ran cold." Harrow-Lewis protocols. I knew that name. I knew it because I was the Lewis, 3 years ago, before I left my life. I had co-authored a massive, obscure academic paper on the standardization of medieval trade disputes and their application to modern international law. My co-author was a brilliant legal theorist named Tessa Harrow. We had proposed a framework for defining liability across language barriers, using historical precedents to close loopholes. It was dense, academic, and purely theoretical, or so I thought. Lucian Varga was using my work. He was using a framework I had helped build to secure a deal that would save his skin. He called it standard, implying he had no idea where it came from. To him, it was just a tool, a lever to pry open Etienne Moreau's wallet. My phone buzzed in my clutch, startling me so badly I almost dropped it. I pulled it out, shielding the screen with my hand. It was the unknown number again. "He doesn't know what you wrote. Keep it that way until it matters." I stared at the screen. The text was not a warning anymore. It was a confirmation. The sender knew. They knew I was standing in the hallway. They knew what I had just heard. They knew that the Lewis in the protocol was the woman in the navy dress standing by the kitchen door. "I am going back in," Lucian snapped into the phone. "Have the papers ready in the library at 10 o'clock, and fix the tie on the signature page. I want zero friction." I heard him disconnect the call. He took a deep breath, the sound of a man inflating a balloon. Then he stepped out of the alcove and back toward the ballroom entrance. I waited 5 seconds, 10 seconds, counting the beats of my heart. Then I peeled myself off the wall and followed him. When I re-entered the ballroom, the sensory shift was jarring. The quiet terror of the hallway was replaced by the roar of 300 people pretending to be having the time of their lives. The string quartet was playing a waltz. Waiters were circulating with trays of filet mignon. I scanned the room for Sloane, but my eyes landed on my mother instead. Dana was standing near the edge of the dance floor, locked in conversation with Celeste Varga. It did not look like a friendly chat between in-laws. It looked like a negotiation. Dana's posture was rigid. Her hands were clasping and unclasping in front of her, twisting the fabric of her evening bag. She was leaning forward, speaking with an urgency that bordered on panic. Celeste stood perfectly still, holding a glass of champagne that she did not drink. She was looking at my mother with an expression of mild distaste, the way one might look at a dog that had tracked mud onto a white rug. I moved closer, weaving through the crowd, trying to catch their voices over the music. "Please, Celeste," my mother was saying. "I just need a little more time on the transfer. The bridge loan you mentioned? Lucian said it was handled." "Lucian has many things on his mind." "Dana," Celeste replied, her voice cool and detached. "He cannot be expected to micromanage your personal overhead. The arrangement was clear. We cover the arrears. You maintain the image. If you are having trouble with the maintenance fees on the condo, perhaps you should have considered a less ambitious address." "It is not the fees," Dana pleaded. "It is the back taxes. They found another lien from before the sale. If I don't pay it by Monday, they freeze the accounts again. And if Sloane finds out?" "Sloane does not need to find out," Celeste cut in. "Sloane needs to focus on being a suitable wife for my son. Do not burden her with your incompetence. Dana, it is unbecoming." Celeste took a sip of her champagne, her eyes scanning the room, already dismissing my mother. "We will discuss this later. Fix your face. You look desperate." Celeste turned and walked away, leaving my mother standing there, looking small and shattered in her emerald gown. The necklace Lucian had given her, the welcome gift, glittered under the lights, looking more like a collar than ever. I stepped up to her. "Mom?" Dana jumped. She spun around, her eyes wide. When she saw it was me, her shoulders slumped. but the panic didn't leave her eyes. "Ivy," she breathed. "You scared me." "What is going on?" I asked quietly. "I heard you mention a lien. I thought Lucian paid off everything." Dana's face hardened. The mask slammed back into place. "It is nothing. Just paperwork. Adult problems. Ivy. Things you do not need to worry about." "Adult problems?" I repeated. "Mom, I spent 6 months negotiating with your creditors. I know your finances better than you do. If there is a lien—" "Stop it," she hissed. "Not here. Do not start with your questions. They are being so generous to us. Lucian is taking care of it. I need to handle the details. Just go sit down, please." She turned away from me, refusing to meet my eyes, and hurried toward the bar. She needed a drink. She needed to numb the reality that she had traded her daughter for a solvency that was as fragile as Lucien's temper. I watched her go, a knot of anger and sorrow tightening in my stomach. She was trapped. We were all trapped. I turned back toward my table, and that was when I saw him, Etienne Moreau. He was sitting at his table, the center of gravity for the European delegation. He was not talking to his colleagues. He was not eating. He was watching Lucien Varga. Lucien was back at the head table, laughing loudly at something a senator had said. He clapped the man on the back, playing the role of the jovial billionaire. But Moreau wasn't looking at the performance. He was looking at Lucien's hands, which were clenched into fists even as he smiled. He was looking at the sweat that had formed on Lucien's brow. Moreau looked like a judge watching a defendant who was talking too much. He looked like a man who smelled a rat but hadn't found the nest yet. And then Lucien moved. He pushed away from the head table and began walking. He wasn't walking toward the bar or the exit. He was walking toward the back of the room, toward the kitchen doors, toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs. Had he seen me in the hallway? Did he know I had overheard the call? I sat down at table 19 just as he arrived. Lucien loomed over the table. He was tall, and he used his height as a weapon. He blocked the light from the chandelier, casting a shadow over me. "Ivy," he said. I looked up. "Lucien?" He smiled, but his eyes were dead. "I have a small favor to ask. A family favor." "What is it?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I left my portfolio in the cloakroom. The private one. It has some documents I need to show Mr. Moreau later tonight. The staff is overwhelmed." He gestured vaguely at the waiters who were moving efficiently around the room. "And I would hate to pull a server off the floor during dinner service. You know how hard good help is to find." He paused, letting the implications sink in. He wasn't asking me because the staff was busy. He was asking me because he wanted to remind me of my place. He wanted to show the room, and perhaps himself, that the sister-in-law, the academic, the smart one, was at his beck and call. He was turning me into a glorified errand girl. "It is a black leather case," he said. "Tell the girl at the front it is for Mr. Varga. She will give it to you." He watched me, waiting for me to bristle. He wanted me to say no. He wanted me to show pride so he could crush it. He wanted to see if the invisible sister had any fight left. If I refused, I made a scene. If I made a scene, he punished Sloane. He punished my mother. But if I went, I would have the portfolio in my hands. The portfolio that likely contained the contracts that used the Harrow-Lewis protocols. I looked at him, and for a split second, I saw the fear behind his arrogance. He was terrified of this deal falling through. He was desperate to control every variable. He thought sending me to fetch his bag was a power move. He didn't realize he was handing the fox the keys to the henhouse. "Of course, Lucien," I said, forcing a polite, submissive smile. "I would be happy to get it for you." He blinked. He looked slightly disappointed that I hadn't put up a fight. "Good," he said. "Bring it to the head table. Do not keep us waiting." He turned and walked away, adjusting his cufflinks. I stood up. I could feel Etienne Moreau's eyes on me again from across the room. He had watched the exchange. He had seen the billionaire treat his future sister-in-law like a servant. I walked toward the exit, my head high. I wasn't leaving the party. I was going to get the weapon. Lucian Varga thought he was dealing with a poor relation who needed to be put in her place. He didn't know he was dealing with the author of the very rule book he was trying to cheat. I pushed through the heavy doors into the lobby, the noise of the party cutting off behind me. The check-in girl looked up, bored. "Mr. Varga needs his portfolio," I said. "The black one?" She sighed, reached under the counter, and produced a sleek, black leather document case. She slid it across the marble surface toward me. It was heavy. It felt like it contained the weight of $700 million. I picked it up. I didn't just have his bag. I had his future in my hands. And I was going to bring it to him, exactly as he asked. But first, I was going to make sure I understood exactly what was inside. I walked back into the ballroom carrying the black leather portfolio with both hands. Like a priestess bearing a sacred relic, the weight of it was substantial, but the knowledge of what was likely inside made it feel heavier. I had not opened it in the lobby. I did not need to. The conversation I had overheard, combined with the frantic text messages and the sheer desperation in Lucian's voice, told me everything I needed to know. This bag contained the leverage. I approached the head table. Lucian was seated now, laughing at something the senator to his right had said. He looked up as I arrived, his eyes flicking to the leather case. For a split second, the mask of the charming host slipped, replaced by the hungry look of an addict seeing his fix. He did not say thank you. He simply reached out and took the portfolio, sliding it under his chair with a practiced motion of his foot. "Good," he said, dismissing me with a turn of his shoulder. "Go sit down. They are serving the first course." I walked back to table 19. The distance between the head table and the service door felt longer this time. I felt exposed, as if the knowledge I possessed was glowing under my skin. I sat down just as a server placed a plate of tuna tartare in front of me. The fish was arranged in a perfect cylinder, topped with a garnish that looked like a microscopic tree. It looked expensive and completely unappetizing. I looked across the room. Etienne Moreau was watching me again. He had seen me deliver the bag. He had seen Lucien hide it. He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes narrowing slightly. He was putting the pieces together, just as I was. The room began to quiet down as the waitstaff cleared the first course. The clinking of silverware against china faded, replaced by the rustle of silk and the shifting of chairs. It was time for the performance. Lucian stood up. He held a flute of champagne in his right hand, gripping the stem with long, manicured fingers. He waited. He did not ask for silence. He simply assumed it. And he got it. Within 10 seconds, 300 people were looking at him. "If I could have your attention," Lucian said, his voice rolling over the crowd like warm honey. "I know we are all eager for the main course, and I promise the lamb is exceptional. But first, I must indulge myself in a moment of gratitude." He turned to look at Sloane. She remained seated, looking up at him with that fixed, terrified smile. "Tonight is about the future," Lucian said. "But a future is only as beautiful as the people we share it with." When I met Sloane, I knew immediately that she was different. She wasn't just beautiful, though I think we can all agree she is the most stunning woman in the room. A polite ripple of applause. Sloane dipped her head, her cheeks flushing. It was not a blush of pleasure. It was the flush of someone being inspected. "She has a grace," Lucian continued. "A quiet elegance that is so rare in this city of noise. She fits into this world as if she were born to it. She understands the role she is destined to play. She is the perfect complement to the life we are building, an anchor, a jewel." I gripped the stem of my water glass. Complement, anchor, jewel. He wasn't describing a partner. He was describing an accessory. He was praising her ability to blend in, to enhance his image, to be decorative and silent. He was praising her for how well she had erased herself to fit into his mold. Sloane's smile wavered. Her eyes darted to me for a fraction of a second. wide and pleading. "Don't make a face," her eyes said. "Just let him talk." Lucian turned his gaze to my mother. Dana straightened in her chair, beaming. She looked like a child waiting for a gold star. "And of course, we must thank the woman who raised such a treasure." Lucian said, "Dana." My mother put a hand to her chest, the emerald necklace flashing. "Dana has shown incredible resilience," Lucian said. He chose the word carefully, letting it hang in the air. "She has made sacrifices to ensure her daughters had opportunities. We all know that life can be complicated, markets fluctuate, fortunes change, but Dana understood that when the time came, she needed to do what was best for the family. She understood the value of partnership." The room murmured its approval. It sounded like a compliment to the uninitiated. It sounded like he was praising a single mother's hard work, but to anyone who knew the truth, and there were plenty of sharks in this room who smelled blood, it was a public reminder of the transaction. He was reminding her that she had been drowning, and he had bought the life raft. He was reminding her that her dignity was a line item he had paid for. Dana nodded enthusiastically, tears pricking her eyes. She didn't hear the insult. She only heard the applause. She was so desperate to be part of the club that she thanked the man who was holding the leash. Then, Lucian turned. He didn't turn to the investors. He didn't turn to his father. He turned his body slowly, deliberately, until he was facing the back corner of the room. He was facing table 19. "And we have the whole family here tonight," Lucian said, his voice taking on a lighter, more amused tone. "We are even joined by Sloane's sister, Ivy." Every head in the room swiveled. I felt the collective gaze of 300 people hit me like a physical wave. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. "Ivy is our family's academic," Lucian said. He said the word academic the way one might say eccentric or unemployable. A chuckle rippled through the room. It was a low, ugly sound, the sound of people who measured worth in equity laughing at someone who measured it in footnotes. "She spends her days with her nose in books that haven't been opened since the Crusades," Lucian continued, flashing a conspiratorial grin at the head table. "It is all very charming, really, while we are here discussing the future of global markets. Ivy is worrying about how they conjugated verbs in the 12th century. It is a quaint little hobby. We like to think of her as our connection to a simpler, less demanding time, a time before real power." The laughter grew louder. It was granted permission now. The billionaire had signaled that the sister was a joke, a harmless drudge who played with dead words while the adults did business. "To Ivy," Lucian said, raising his glass in a mock toast. "May you always find comfort in your dusty libraries, far away from the complexities of the real world." He drank. The room drank with him. My mother was beaming. She was clapping. She looked at me with a frantic, encouraging nod. "See?" her face said. "He included you. He is being nice. Smile, Ivy. Smile." Sloane was not smiling. She was staring at her plate. Her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She looked trapped in glass, screaming without a sound. I did not smile. I did not look down. I looked directly at Lucian Varga. I kept my face completely neutral, a mask of calm observation. I let his insults wash over me like water over stone. He wanted me to be embarrassed. He wanted me to look down, to blush, to show the room that I accepted my status as the inferior sibling. I refused to give him that satisfaction, and I wasn't the only one who wasn't laughing. From the corner of my eye, I saw the European table. The delegates were polite, holding their glasses, but their faces were stony, and at the center of them, Etienne Moreau sat motionless. He had not raised his glass. He was not looking at Lucian. He was looking at me. His expression was intense, calculating. He looked like a man who had just realized that the joke was actually the most important person in the room. He watched me with a focused intensity, as if he were trying to read a text that had been written in invisible ink. Lucian sat down. Satisfied with his little display of dominance, the servers moved in to clear the plates for the main course. The conversation roared back to life, louder than before. 20 minutes later, the dynamic shifted again. I was picking at my lamb chops, which were excellent, though I had no appetite, when a shadow fell over my table. It was Lucian. He had come down from the mountaintop to walk among the mortals. He had a glass of scotch in his hand now, and his face was flushed with the high of his performance. He was making his rounds, touching shoulders, shaking hands, ensuring that every guest felt the glow of his attention. He stopped at my table. He didn't pull up a chair. He stood over me, forcing me to crane my neck to look at him. "Enjoying the lamb, Ivy?" he asked. "It is very good, Lucien," I said. "Good, good." He swirled his scotch. "I noticed you didn't drink the toast. Not to worry. I know champagne goes to your head. Better to stick to water." He was baiting me. He wanted a reaction. "I am fine, thank you," I said. He leaned in closer, invading my personal space. The smell of expensive scotch and arrogance was overpowering. "You know," he said, lowering his voice so only the nearby tables could hear. "I was thinking about what you said earlier, about the grammar. It was cute, but tonight isn't about grammar. Ivy, it is about contracts. It is about the language of the deal." He gestured toward the room, toward the men in suits who were carving up the world. "Do you have any idea what we are actually doing here tonight?" he asked. It was a test, a public quiz to prove my ignorance. "I assume you are finalizing the expansion into the Eurozone," I said quietly. "Broad strokes," he scoffed. "Anyone who reads the journal knows that. I am talking about the mechanics, the nuts and bolts." He smirked. "Tell me, Professor, in your studies of dead poets, did you ever come across a force majeure clause? Do you even know what that means in a modern cross-border acquisition?" He looked around at the nearby guests, inviting them to watch the slaughter. "Watch me stump the librarian," his eyes said. I looked at him. I thought about the portfolio under his chair. I thought about the 300 pages of the Harrow-Lewis protocols that defined exactly how a force majeure event should be interpreted to prevent liability shielding in multilingual jurisdictions. I thought about the nights I had spent arguing with Tessa about the specific phrasing of unforeseeable acts versus acts of God. I could bury him right now. I could cite the specific article of the Commercial Code. I could reference the precedent set in the Munich courts last year. I could reveal that the standard he was relying on was my intellectual property. But the text message flashed in my mind. The message flashed back in my mind. He still didn't know what I'd written. Good, not yet. Keep it that way until it matters. It didn't matter yet, not quite. So I gave him what he wanted, but I gave it to him with a blade inside it. "A force majeure clause," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Contracts to exempt the parties from their obligations in the event of an extraordinary circumstance beyond their control, like a war, or a strike, or a natural disaster." I paused, then added, "It is designed to protect honest actors from events they cannot predict. It is not designed to protect negligent actors from the consequences of their own poor planning." The smile on Lucian's face flickered. He had expected me to stammer. He had expected me to say, "I don't know." Instead, I had given him a textbook definition, delivered with the dry precision of a court reporter, and the addendum, the part about negligent actors, hit a little too close to home for a man who was frantically trying to cover a $700 million hole. "Technically correct," he said, his voice losing some of its jovial bounce. "Though in the real world, we use it to manage risk. It is a shield. Ivy, not a moral judgment." "Language is always a moral judgment. Lucien," I said softly, "that is why we choose our words so carefully, isn't it?" He stared at me. His eyes narrowed. He was looking for the trap. He sensed that I was mocking him, but he couldn't prove it. My tone was polite. My face was blank. I was the dutiful sister-in-law answering a question. He was irritated. I could see the muscle in his jaw working. He wanted me to be flustered. He wanted the satisfaction of my panic, but I was giving him nothing but cool, flat competence. "Stick to the history books, Ivy," he snapped. "The real world has sharper edges than you are used to." "I am learning," I said. He grunted, drained his scotch, and turned away abruptly. He walked back toward the head table, his stride a little too aggressive. He looked like a man who had gone to kick a stray dog and stubbed his toe on a rock instead. I watched him go. Across the room, Etienne Moreau watched him go, too. Then, slowly, deliberately, Moreau turned his head and looked at me. He raised his glass. It wasn't a toast. It was a salute. He knew. I didn't know how he knew, or how much he knew, but he had seen the exchange. He had seen Lucien try to humiliate me, and he had seen me hold my ground. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. My hands were steady. The dinner was ending. The dessert was coming. And after dessert, the entertainment. Lucien thought the entertainment was going to be him showing off his French. He thought it was going to be another round of the Ivy Lewis humiliation hour. He didn't realize that the stage was set for a different kind of drama. I looked at the portfolio under his chair at the head table. I looked at the anxious sweat on his forehead. I looked at Sloane, who was staring at the tablecloth as if wishing she could dissolve into the fibers. The blade was in the toast. Now, it was time to twist it. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice announced over the microphone, "Mr. Varga has a special treat for us before the cake is cut." Lucien stood up again. He looked energized, manic. He was ready for the finale. I sat back in my chair. Bring it on. I thought, let's talk about language. The waiters were clearing the main course, moving with the synchronized efficiency of a murmuration of starlings. When Lucien Varga stood up again, he did not tap his glass this time. He simply walked to the center of the floor, the microphone in his hand, and the room naturally gravitated toward him. He had that specific kind of gravity that comes from owning the building, the wine, and the debt of half the people in the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lucien said, his voice dropping into a register of intimate conspiracy, "before we move to the soufflé, which I'm told is excellent, I thought we might have a little entertainment, a deviation from the standard toasts and speeches." He smiled, but it was not the benevolent smile of a host. It was the sharp, glinting smile of a boy with a magnifying glass standing over an anthill. As I mentioned earlier, my future sister-in-law, Ivy, is a student of the past, a linguist. He gestured toward table 19. "Stand up, Ivy. Let everyone see you." I stayed seated for a heartbeat, my hands gripping the linen napkin in my lap. The spotlight hit me, a literal beam of light that the lighting technician had swung toward the back of the room. It was blinding. "Come now," Lucien coaxed, his voice hardening just enough to be a command. "Don't be shy." I stood up. I had no choice. To refuse would be to cause a scene, and a scene was the one thing Sloane could not afford. I stood straight, my back rigid, my face a blank canvas. Lucien walked toward me, stopping about 10 feet away. He wanted distance. He wanted the room to see the gap between us, the billionaire in his bespoke tuxedo and the poor relation in her 5-year-old navy dress. "I have always had a deep respect for language," Lucien announced to the room, pacing slowly back and forth like a lecturer. "When I spent 3 months in Provence during my gap year, I didn't just drink wine. I immersed myself. I lived with the locals. I breathed the history. Some people spend years in a classroom to learn a culture. I prefer direct acquisition. It is more efficient." He said 3 months, as if it were a lifetime. He claimed immersion, as if renting a villa with a private chef constituted a struggle for survival. It was the arrogance of the tourist who thinks buying a postcard makes him a citizen. "Ivy here," he continued, gesturing at me with the microphone, "has spent years studying the old language, the langue d'oil. It is a dead tongue, spoken by kings and serfs in the 12th century. And since we have our distinguished guests from the Moreau Consortium here tonight," he nodded toward the European table. Etienne Moreau was watching, his face unreadable. I thought it would be a gesture of respect to bridge the gap between our worlds, a demonstration of Ivy's talents, a little dialogue. The room applauded politely. They thought this was a parlor trick, a charming bit of intellectual theater. They had no idea they were watching an execution. Lucien turned to me. He clipped the microphone to his lapel so his hands were free. He looked me in the eye, and the malice in his gaze was so naked, it was almost breathtaking. Then, he began to speak. Or ça, ma douce demoiselle, he intoned, his voice booming through the speakers. He was speaking Old French. Or rather, he was speaking what he thought was Old French. It was a clumsy, broken pastiche of archaic terms and modern syntax, delivered with a pronunciation that was so mangled it hurt my ears. Approchez-vous, que je puisse voir si vous valez le pain que vous mangez. Come closer, that I may see if you are worth the bread you eat. The American guests smiled. To them, it sounded romantic. It sounded like a movie. They heard the rolled R's and the nasal vowels and thought it was poetry. But the Europeans stiffened. I saw a man at Moreau's table set his glass down very slowly. I saw another woman tilt her head, her eyebrows knitting together. They understood. They heard the command. They heard the insult wrapped in the velvet of a foreign tongue. I did not move. I stayed exactly where I was, my hands clasped in front of me. Lucien chuckled. She is a bit rusty, he said to the room in English. Let me try again. He stepped closer. Invading my personal space, the smell of his scotch and his expensive cologne washed over me. Je vous ordonne de sourire, he said, his voice dropping lower. Un chien ne mord pas la main qui le nourrit. I order you to smile. A dog does not bite the hand that feeds it. It was a direct slap in the face. He was calling me a dog. He was reminding me of the money he had spent on my mother, the debt he held over us. Sloane went pale. She was sitting at the head table, clutching her fork as if it were a weapon she didn't know how to use. She didn't speak Old French, but she spoke the language of abuse fluently. She heard the tone. She saw the set of his jaw. She knew he wasn't playing. She looked at me, her eyes wide pools of terror, begging me to just take it, Ivy, please. I looked at Lucien. I kept my face impassive. I let the silence stretch. To the audience, my silence looked like confusion. It looked like the academic was failing the test. Lucien was winning. He was the master of the room, the worldly billionaire who could outspeak the specialist in her own field. Emboldened by my lack of response, Lucien grew bolder. Bullies always do. When you don't push back, they assume the wall is gone. They assume they can run as far as they want. Vous êtes muette? He mocked, his voice rising theatrically. Peut-être que votre langue a été coupée pour vos péchés? Ou peut-être que vous savez que vous n'avez rien à dire? Are you mute? Perhaps your tongue was cut for your sins? Or perhaps you know you have nothing to say. He was enjoying himself. He was performing for the crowd. But the real show was for himself. He was proving that he could humiliate me, the one person who knew his secret, and I would do nothing. He turned to the audience, spreading his hands. It seems our scholar is shy, or perhaps overwhelmed. Laughter rippled through the room. It was nervous laughter, uncertain, but it was there. They were siding with the winner. Lucien turned back to me for the finale. He leaned in close, so close I could see the pores on his nose. He switched off the microphone for a moment, creating a bubble of intimacy, but he projected his voice so the nearby tables, and the Europeans, could hear every syllable. Écoutez-moi bien, parasite, he hissed. Vous n'êtes rien. Vous êtes une charge, une dette que j'ai achetée. Vous existez parce que je le permets. Listen to me well, parasite. You are nothing. You are a burden, a debt I purchased. You exist because I allow it. The word parasite hung in the air between us. It was ugly. It was visceral. It was the truth of how he saw me, how he saw my mother, how he saw Sloane. We were things he had bought, things that drained him, things that owed him their very breath. The room was dead silent. Even the Americans, who didn't understand the words, felt the violence of the delivery. The air pressure in the room had dropped. Sloane made a small, choked sound. My mother looked down at her plate, her face burning. At the European table, Etienne Moreau was leaning forward, his eyes locked on me. He was waiting. He was the only one in the room who knew that the gun Lucien was firing was pointed backward. Lucien stepped back, smirking. He reached for his microphone to make a quip, to dismiss me, to end the scene with him as the victor. I inhaled. It was a slow, deliberate breath. I filled my lungs with the orchid-scented air. Holding it for a second, I let the anger that had been simmering in my gut crystallize into something cold and hard. He wanted a demonstration? Fine, I would give him a demonstration. I met his gaze and held it, steady, unblinking. I did not shout. I pitched my voice to carry, using the diaphragm control I had learned in lecture halls. Monsieur Varga, I said. My old French was not the clumsy, tourist mangled garbage he had just spewed. It was pure. It was crisp. It sounded like it had been etched into stone 800 years ago. Lucien froze. His hand hovered halfway to his tie. Si vous comptez m'insulter devant vos vassaux, I continued, my voice ringing with absolute authority. Ayez l'obligeance de ne pas massacrer la syntaxe. If you intend to insult me before your vassals, have the courtesy not to massacre the syntax. The silence that followed was heavy, immediate, and total. Lucien's smile faltered. His eyes darted to the side. He hadn't expected me to speak. He certainly hadn't expected me to speak with such command. I took a step forward. I was not the student anymore. I was the professor, and class was in session. Vous avez utilisé le subjonctif présent dans une clause conditionnelle factuelle, I said, my tone dripping with polite, clinical disdain. C'est une erreur de débutant, une erreur d'écolier. You use the present subjunctive in a factual conditional clause. It is a beginner's error, a schoolboy's error. I saw the recognition hit the European delegates. A woman at Moreau's table covered her mouth to hide a smile. Moreau himself didn't hide anything. He nodded, a slow, deep nod of appreciation. Lucien's face turned a mottled shade of red. He understood the tone. He understood he was being corrected, but he was trapped. If he switched to English, he admitted he couldn't keep up. If he stayed in French, he was fighting a duel with a butter knife against a broadsword. De plus, I added, delivering the final blow with surgical precision. Le mot parasite est un anachronisme. Au XIIe siècle, on aurait dit pique assiette, mais je suppose que cela ne figurait pas dans votre brochure touristique de 3 mois. Furthermore, the word parasite is an anachronism. In the 12th century, one would have said pique assiette, but I suppose that was not in your 3-month tourist brochure. I stopped. I stood tall. I looked at him with the cool, detached pity of someone watching a child try to lift a weight that was too heavy for them. Lucien stood there, his mouth slightly open, the microphone dangling uselessly from his lapel. The master of the universe had been silenced by a grammar lesson. The guests stared, looking from him to me, sensing the shift in power even if they couldn't parse the verbs. I had not just defended myself, I had dismantled his intellectual vanity in front of the very people he needed to impress, and I wasn't done yet, but for now, the silence was enough. I let it sit there, heavy and suffocating, waiting for him to make the next move. The silence that followed my correction was not the stunned quiet of a crowd that had missed a joke. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room that had just witnessed a murder. Lucien Varga stood frozen, his mouth slightly ajar. The microphone still clipped to his lapel, picking up the ragged sound of his breathing. For the first time all night, he did not look like a titan of industry. He did not look like the man who owned the building. He looked small. He looked like a schoolboy who had been called to the front of the class to recite a poem he had not read, only to wet his pants in front of the headmaster. The ambient noise of the room, the clinking of silverware, the murmur of gossip, the shifting of silk, had evaporated. 300 people were holding their breath. They looked from Lucien, whose face was rapidly transitioning from shock to a mottled, ugly purple, to me, standing calm and vertical in my navy dress. I did not let the silence linger long enough for him to recover. I did not give him the grace of a pause. "I apologize," I said, switching seamlessly into English. My voice was level, pitched perfectly to carry across the room without the aid of a microphone. "I assumed that since you chose to address me in the dialect of the 12th century Champagne courts, you were inviting a peer review." Lucian blinked. He tried to form a smile, but it twitched and died on his lips. "Ivy, You were merely demonstrating your immersion," I interrupted, my tone helpful, solicitous. "But you see, Lucian, there is a difference between memorizing phrases from a guidebook and understanding the architecture of a language." I took a slow step forward, moving out from behind the barrier of table 19. I was walking into the open floor now. I was walking into his territory, but I did not feel like an invader. I felt like an exterminator. "I did not learn Old French to impress tourists in Provence," I said, addressing the room now, making eye contact with the senator at the head table. Then the tech mogul on the left. "I spent 6 years in graduate archives deciphering legal registers. I specialize in the evolution of contract law from medieval customary rights to modern international statutes. My work is not about dead words. Lucian, it is about how powerful men use language to hide their intent." I turned back to him. He looked like he wanted to back away, but his ego wouldn't let him. He was rooted to the spot by his own vanity. "For example," I said, my voice dropping back into that clinical, professorial register. "When you attempted to use the imperative mood earlier to command me, you used the modern French guttural R. It was clumsy. In the 12th century, the R was rolled, tapped against the teeth. It was an elegant sound, not a gargle." I saw a few heads nod at the European table. They knew. They heard it. "And your vowels," I continued, gesturing vaguely at his mouth, as if it were a defective piece of machinery. "You closed them too tight. The aristocracy of that era spoke with open, resonant vowels. It projected authority. Your pronunciation was Nussel. It sounded less like a king issuing a decree and more like a merchant haggling over the price of turnips." A stifled snort of laughter erupted from somewhere near the back. It was quickly suppressed, but the damage was done. The image had been planted. The billionaire was no longer a king. He was a turnip merchant. Lucian ripped the microphone off his lapel. The feedback squealed, a high-pitched shriek that made everyone wince. "That is enough," he snapped, his voice tight. "We get it. Ivy, you are very smart. You read books. Congratulations." He tried to laugh. A booming, artificial sound meant to reset the mood, meant to signal to the herd that the entertainment was over and the hierarchy was restored. "She takes everything so literally," he said to the crowd, grinning maniacally. "No sense of humor in academia, is there?" But the room did not laugh with him. The laughter that had come so easily 10 minutes ago, when I was the punchline, was gone. The guests shifted in their seats. They looked down at their plates. They looked at their shoes. They sensed the shift in power, the way animals sense a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. They realized that the man holding the microphone was not in control. He was flailing. I saw Etienne Moreau lean over and whisper something to the woman beside him. She nodded, her expression grave. Then Moreau looked at me. He did not smile, but he raised his eyebrows once, a gesture of profound respect. It was an acknowledgement. "I see you," the look said, "and I see him." I looked at the head table. My mother, Dana, looked as if she had stopped breathing 5 minutes ago. Her face was a mask of pure horror. Her hands were gripping the tablecloth so hard I thought she might tear the linen. She was not looking at Lucian with anger for his cruelty. She was looking at me with terror. In her eyes, I wasn't defending my dignity. I was setting fire to her life raft. She saw the house in the suburbs vanishing. She saw the creditors returning. She saw the safe world she had clawed her way into crumbling because her daughter wouldn't just take the insult and sit down. Next to her, Gideon Varga sat motionless. He was not horrified. He was not amused. He was calculating. His cold, gray eyes were fixed on me, assessing the damage. He looked like a man watching a stock crash, trying to decide whether to sell or double down. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that I was not a piece of furniture. I was a variable he had failed to account for. And Celeste? Celeste's smile had hardened into a rictus of fury. She looked at her son, seeing his humiliation, and then she looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like a physical heat. I had broken the cardinal rule of their world: never make the money look foolish. But it was Sloane who held my attention. Sloane was sitting perfectly still, her hands resting on the table. She was staring at me. Her eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. For the last 3 years, she had looked at me with pity, or annoyance, or a vague, distant affection. She had seen me as the sister who failed, the sister who gave up, the sister who needed to be protected. Now, she was looking at me like she was seeing a stranger, or rather, like she was seeing the ghost of the sister I used to be, the sister who had ambitions, the sister who didn't back down. The fear was still there in her face, but beneath it, there was something else, a flicker of awe, a spark of realization that the monster who held her leash was not 10 feet tall. He was just a man with bad grammar. Lucian saw it too. He saw the room slipping away. He saw the respect in Moreau's eyes. He saw the confusion in Sloane's. Panic flared in his chest. I could see it in the way his Adam's apple bobbed. He needed to regain control. He needed to be the victim. He needed to turn the narrative around before the dessert was served. He took a step toward me, his face twisting into a sneer. The charm was gone. The sophisticated host was gone. This was the bully on the playground who had just been punched in the nose. "You planned this," he accused, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I beg your pardon?" I asked politely. "You planned this," he repeated, louder this time, pointing a finger at me. "You didn't just happen to know those words. You researched me. You knew I studied in Provence. You knew I had an interest in the language. You came here tonight with an agenda." He looked around the room, desperate to build a coalition. "Look at her," he shouted. "Look at how smug she is. She prepared this. She memorized these little corrections. She came to my engagement party, to my home, specifically to try and embarrass me." "Lucian," I said calmly, "you called me up here. You asked for the demonstration." "Because I was trying to be nice," he yelled. The mask was completely off now. He was sweating. "I was trying to include you. I was trying to give you a moment. And this is how you repay me? By trying to make me look stupid in front of my guests?" "You do not need my help to look stupid." "Lucienne," I said, "you are managing that quite well on your own." A gasp went through the room. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered loudly against a china plate. Lucien's face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He took another step toward me, his hands balling into fists. For a second, I thought he might actually strike me. "You are jealous," he spat. "That is what this is. You are jealous of Sloane. You are jealous that she is marrying a Varga, and you are stuck in some rat-hole apartment translating toaster manuals for pennies. You are a bitter, lonely woman, Ivy, and you hate that we are happy." "Happy?" I asked. I looked at Sloane. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at her hands. She looked about as happy as a prisoner on death row. "Yes, happy," Lucian screamed. "We are building a legacy. We are building an empire. And what are you building? Nothing. You are a parasite. Just like I said, you feed off our success. You feed off my charity." He turned to the crowd, his arms wide. "She is targeting me. Can't you see that? She is obsessed. She has probably been stalking me, looking for weaknesses, looking for some way to tear us down because she cannot stand to see her sister succeed." It was a desperate pivot. It was the classic defense of the narcissist. Attack the accuser. Paint himself as the victim of a crazy, obsessed woman. "I bet she even listened to my private calls," Lucian raved, his paranoia latching on to the nearest explanation. "I bet she has been spying on us. That is the only explanation. No one knows that much about medieval law, unless they are looking for something specific. She is a spy, A corporate spy. The room murmured. The accusation was absurd, but it was loud. And in a room full of people terrified of corporate espionage, it struck a nerve. Gideon Varga stood up slowly at the head table. He didn't look angry. He looked interested. If they could frame me as a spy, as a malicious actor, they could discredit everything I said. They could ruin me. It was a lifeline. "Lucian," Gideon said, his voice deep and commanding. "Calm down." "No, father," Lucian shouted. "She is a fraud. She is trying to sabotage the expansion. She is trying to sabotage the deal with Moreau." He pointed at the European table. "She probably knows about the contracts. She probably stole information." I stood there, watching him unravel. He was digging his own grave with both hands, scooping out the earth in frantic, terrified handfuls. He was accusing me of the very thing that would destroy him. He was bringing up the contracts. He was bringing up the deal. He thought he was accusing me of being a spy. He didn't realize he was accusing the architect of stealing her own blueprints. I felt the weight of the phone in my clutch. I felt the weight of the text message I had received. "He doesn't know what you wrote." He really didn't. He had no idea. "A spy?" I asked, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "Is that what you think I am, Lucian?" "I know what you are," he sneered. "You are a nobody who got lucky with a few vocabulary words, and now you are going to leave. Security!" He waved his hand toward the back of the room. "Get her out of here. She is disrupting the event. She is harassing the host." Two large men in dark suits stepped out from the shadows near the entrance. They moved toward me. The room watched. My mother had her face in her hands. Sloane was weeping silently. I did not move. I did not look at the security guards. I looked at Etienne Moreau. He was watching the scene unfold with a look of utter disgust. Not at me, at Lucien. He saw a man who had lost control. He saw a man who was unstable. He saw a partner who was a liability. But he needed more than just a bad temper to kill a $700 million deal. He needed a smoking gun. Lucian had just handed it to him, by accusing me of knowing about the contracts, by accusing me of sabotage. He had opened the door. "Wait," I said. The word was not loud, but it had the force of a command. The security guards hesitated. They looked at Lucian, then at me. There was something in my voice that made them pause. It was the voice of someone who outranked the person signing their paychecks. "You accuse me of not understanding the real world. Lucian," I said, "you accuse me of being a parasite. You accuse me of spying on your contracts." I reached down to the table next to me, picked up my glass of water, and took a sip. I set it down with a sharp click. "But you seem to have forgotten one thing," I said. "The portfolio." Lucian's eyes widened. He looked under his chair. The black leather bag was there. "You asked me to fetch it," I said. "You put it in my hands. You trusted the parasite with your empire." "So you did look," Lucian shouted triumphantly. "You admitted it. You looked in the bag." "I did not need to look in the bag. Lucian," I said, "I know what is in there because I know what you need to survive tonight." I turned to Etienne Moreau. "Monsieur Moreau," I said in English, "I believe you are waiting for the Varga Corporation to sign the standard compliance agreement for the Eurozone expansion, specifically, the agreement regarding cross-border liability definitions." Moreau stood up. He was a tall man, and he commanded the room effortlessly. "That is correct, Mademoiselle Lewis." "And I believe," I continued, "that the validity of that contract rests entirely on the Harrow-Lewis protocols." Lucian laughed. It was a wet, desperate sound. "Harrow-Lewis? What is she talking about? It is a standard form. It is boilerplate." "It is not boilerplate," Moreau said, his voice turning cold. "It is a proprietary framework developed 3 years ago to ensure ethical compliance in multilingual jurisdictions. It is the only reason my consortium is even considering this partnership." "Exactly," I said. I looked at Lucian. He was staring at me, confusion warring with panic on his face. He had heard the name Harrow Lewis 1,000 times. He had cited it on conference calls. He had built his entire strategy around it. But he had never asked who Harrow was, and he had never, ever asked who Lewis was. "Lucian," I said softly, "who do you think Lewis is?" He blinked. He looked at me. He looked at my mother. He looked at Sloane. Lewis. Ivy Lewis. The realization hit him like a physical blow. I saw the color drain from his face until he was the color of old paper. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the edge of the head table to stay upright. "No," he whispered. "No, that is impossible. You translate manuals. You live in Arlington." "I do," I said, "because 3 years ago, I left my research track to save my family from the debt you are now holding over their heads, but before I left, I wrote the rules that you are trying to play by." I turned to the room. "I am not a spy," I said. "I am the author." The silence that followed this time was not heavy. It was absolute. It was the silence of a guillotine blade hanging at the top of its arc. Just before the drop, Lucian Varga was not just small. He was extinct, and I was just getting started. "Author?" Lucian choked out the word, his face twisting into a mask of incredulous fury. "You are lying. You are a liar." He looked around the room, his eyes wild, seeking any purchase on the slipping cliff face of his reputation. He realized the silence was no longer stunned. It was skeptical. He needed to shatter my credibility, and he needed to do it immediately. "She is lying," Lucian roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Do not listen to her. She is a corporate spy. She has been listening to my private calls. She stole confidential terms from my office." He turned to the investors, sweat beading on his forehead. "Think about it. How else would she know the name of the protocol? How else would she know the terms of the deal? She is an imposter. She is trying to blackmail us." It was a frantic, clumsy narrative, constructed in real time out of panic and arrogance, but in a room filled with people whose fortunes relied on secrets. The accusation of espionage was a powerful trigger. Gideon Varga stood up. If Lucian was the fire, Gideon was the ice that burned. He moved to his son's side, placing a hand on Lucian's shoulder, not to comfort him, but to steady a weapon that was firing blindly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gideon said, his voice calm, deep, and resonant. It was the voice of a man who had silenced Senate hearings. "I apologize for this disruption. It appears my future daughter-in-law's sister has suffered a break. However, the accusations she is making, and the proprietary information she is referencing, suggest something far more criminal than a mere tantrum." He turned his cold, gray eyes on me. "Ivy, you are admitting to possessing confidential data regarding Varga Corporation's pending mergers. That is a felony. If you walked out of here right now, we might consider not pressing charges, but if you say another word, I will have the legal team bury you so deep you will not see the sun for 10 years. It was a masterful pivot. In seconds, they had taken my revelation of authorship and twisted it into a confession of theft. Celeste Varga stepped forward to flank them, completing the phalanx. "She is unwell," Celeste said, her voice dripping with faux concern that carried to the back of the room. "She has always been unstable, jealous of Sloane, obsessed with our family. It is a tragedy, really. Security. Please remove her before she hurts herself." The room wavered. I could feel the doubt creeping back in. The Vargas were a monolith of power. I was a woman in a 5-year-old dress standing alone. The narrative was bending to their will because gravity always pulls toward the money. Suddenly, a hand gripped my arm, hard. It was my mother. Dana had rushed from the bar, her face pale and streaked with mascara. She dug her nails into my bicep, pulling me toward her. "Ivy, stop," she hissed, her voice a desperate, terrified whisper. "What are you doing? You're ruining everything." "I am telling the truth." "Mom," I said, trying to pull away. "I don't care about the truth," she begged, her eyes wide and manic. Just apologize. Tell them you lied. Tell them you were drunk. Please, Ivy, if he pulls his support, we lose everything. The condo, the car, the allowance. I cannot go back to being poor. I cannot do it. Is that all this is to you? I asked, looking down at her. An allowance? It is survival, she cried. He handled the debts, Ivy. The debts they were impossible. $2,400,000. I would have gone to jail. He saved us. She didn't mean to say the number loud. It slipped out in her panic. A specific, damning figure. $2,400,000. The room went quiet again. The number hung in the air like smoke. I looked at Sloane. Sloane was standing at the head table, 10 feet away. She had heard it. She had heard the number, for 3 years. Sloane had believed that Lucian fell in love with her. She believed he helped our mother out of kindness. She believed the engagement was a fairy tale romance that just happened to come with a billionaire attached. But now, she heard the price tag. Sloane's face crumbled. The glass wall she had built around herself shattered. She looked at Lucian, then at Dana. $2 million? Sloane whispered. Her voice broke. You sold me? No, darling. No, Dana stammered, releasing my arm and reaching toward Sloane. It wasn't like that. He helped us. And in exchange, he just wanted to be close to the family. In exchange? Sloane repeated. She backed away from the table, knocking over her chair. It clattered to the floor, a jarring sound in the silent room. He paid off your debt. And you gave him me? Lucian saw his prize slipping away. He abandoned the spy narrative and lunged for control of his fiancé. Sloane, listen to me, Lucian said, his voice dropping into that soothing, gaslighting tone he used so well. Your mother is hysterical. Ivy is lying. This is all a misunderstanding. We love each other. That is all that matters. Do not touch me, Sloane said. She didn't shout it. She said it with a quiet, horrified clarity. She looked at the ring on her finger, a diamond the size of a quail's egg, and saw it for what it was, a receipt. This is ridiculous, Gideon barked, sensing the situation spiraling out of control. Lucian, get your woman under control. Security, remove this intruder immediately. The 2 security guards stepped forward again, looking uncertain but ready to obey the man who signed the checks. I wouldn't do that if I were you. A clear, calm voice rang out from the side of the room. A woman stepped out from the shadows near the terrace doors. She was tall, wearing a sharp black suit that looked like it had been tailored by an architect. She had dark hair cut in a precise bob and glasses that caught the light. She had been standing there the whole time, watching, waiting. I recognized her instantly, though I hadn't seen her in 3 years. Tessa? I breathed. Tessa Harrow walked onto the floor. She didn't look at Lucian or Gideon. She walked straight to me and stood by my side. Facing the room, she held up her phone. The screen was glowing. My name is Tessa Harrow, she announced. Her voice was professional, crisp, the voice of a woman who charged $900 an hour for her advice. I am an attorney specializing in international intellectual property and contract law. I am also the co-author of the Harrow-Lewis Compliance Protocols. She gestured to me. And this is Ivy Lewis, my partner. Lucian looked like he had been slapped. Who the hell are you? I am the person who just recorded the last 20 minutes of this party, Tessa said calmly, including the part where you threatened your fiancé's sister, called her a parasite, and then accused her of a felony to cover up your own incompetence. She tapped her phone. And I also have the recording of the phone call you made in the hallway. Lucian, the one where you admitted your entire liquidity depends on a deal you are trying to sign tonight using a stolen interpretation of our work. That is illegal, Gideon shouted, pointing a finger at her. You cannot record private conversations. In the District of Columbia, Tessa replied coolly, only one party needs to consent to a recording. And since I was a party to the conversation of public interest occurring in a semi-public venue, Well, we can argue the semantics in court, but I think the court of public opinion might move faster. She turned to the investors. Lucien Varga does not have a license to use the Harrow-Lewis framework. We never granted it. In fact, if he signs that deal tonight using our intellectual property, he is committing fraud. The word fraud landed like a grenade. The investors at the back tables began whispering frantically. Phones were coming out. The whisper campaign was starting before the dessert had even been served. Lucien was hyperventilating. He looked at his father, begging for a solution. Gideon was staring at Tessa with pure hatred, realizing he had been outflanked. But the final blow didn't come from Tessa, or me. It came from the head table. Etienne Moreau stood up. He had been watching the entire exchange with the stillness of a statue. Now, he moved. He walked around the table, ignoring Gideon, ignoring Celeste. He walked until he was standing in the center of the room. Between the Vargas and us, he looked at Lucien. The look was not angry. It was disappointed. It was the look of a man who had ordered a vintage wine and been served vinegar. "Monsieur Varga," Moreau said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced the room instantly. "My consortium prides itself on stability. We do not invest in chaos, and we certainly do not invest in men who build their empires on the humiliation of their families." He turned to me. He looked me up and down, taking in the navy dress, the defiant posture, the intelligence in my eyes. "Mademoiselle Lewis," he said, "I have read your paper, the one on the linguistic evolution of liability. It is brilliant." "Thank you, Monsieur Moreau," I said softly. "I did not know the author was available," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "I assumed Lewis was an old professor at Oxford, to find that she is the sister of the bride. It is a surprise." He turned back to the room. "The expansion of the Varga Corporation into the European market was contingent on strict adherence to the new compliance standards," Moreau announced. "Standards that, it appears, belong to Mademoiselle Lewis and Ms. Harrow." He paused. He looked at Gideon Varga, who was now pale and silent. "I cannot, in good conscience, sign a contract with a partner who demonstrates such ethical flexibility," Moreau said, "and I certainly cannot do business with a man who treats the architect of his own safety net with such disdain." He picked up his glass of wine from the table, looked at it, and then set it down. "The deal is suspended," Moreau said. "Indefinitely." The room erupted. "No!" Lucien screamed. He lunged toward Moreau. "You cannot do this! We have a verbal agreement. You cannot walk away because of her." "I am not walking away because of her." "Lucien," Moreau said, his voice turning hard as steel, "I am walking away because of you. You revealed yourself tonight. You showed us exactly who you are when you think no one who matters is watching." He looked at me one last time. "But it turns out, someone mattered." Lucien collapsed into his chair. He put his head in his hands. $700 million had just evaporated. The bridge loan was gone. The expansion was dead. The empire was naked. Dana let out a wail of despair and sank to the floor, her emerald gown pooling around her like spilled toxic waste. Celeste was frozen, staring at the wall, her mind likely already calculating divorce settlements and liability shields. But I wasn't looking at them. I was looking at Sloane. Sloane was standing alone in the wreckage of her engagement party. She looked at Lucien, who was weeping over his lost money. She looked at our mother, who was weeping over her lost status. Then she looked at me. She took a deep breath. She reached down to her left hand. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled the ring off her finger. It came off with a little resistance, as if it didn't want to let go. But she forced it. She walked over to where Lucien was sitting. He didn't look up. She dropped the ring into his champagne glass. It made a sharp clink and sank to the bottom, bubbling in the golden liquid. "You can keep the receipt," Sloane said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud enough to be heard. "I am not for sale anymore." She turned and walked toward me. She didn't run. She walked. She walked past Gideon, who stared at her with shock. She walked past Celeste. She reached me and grabbed my hand. Her palm was sweaty, but her grip was tight. "Let's go," Sloane whispered. "Please, Ivy, let's just go." "We are going," I said. I looked at Tessa. She nodded, slipping her phone into her pocket. "I will handle the press," she said quietly. "Go." I took my sister's hand. We walked toward the exit. The crowd parted for us. They weren't looking at us like furniture anymore. They were looking at us with fear and awe and the uncomfortable realization that they had just watched the world change. Lucien Varga was screaming something behind us, something about lawsuits and ruin, but his voice sounded small. It sounded like a ghost. We pushed through the heavy doors of the Marrow House and stepped out into the night. The air was cold and clean. It smelled of rain and asphalt, not orchids and money. Sloane took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the first free air she had tasted in 6 months. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, a real smile. "You speak Old French?" she asked, a hysterical little laugh bubbling up. "I do," I said. "Teach me," she said. "Teach me how to say go to hell in the 12th century. "I will," I promised. "I will teach you everything." We walked down the steps, leaving the lights of the party behind us, walking into the dark, quiet street. We had no money. We had no ride. We had a furious billionaire and a distraught mother behind us. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt dangerous, and it felt good. The fallout from the engagement party did not happen with a bang. It happened with a whisper, the kind that moves faster than light through the fiber optic cables of the financial district. By Monday morning, the Marrow House incident had become the primary topic of conversation in every boardroom from New York to London. They were not talking about the canapes. They were talking about Lucien Varga, the man who had tried to play king and ended up playing the fool. The story leaked with brutal efficiency. First, it was a blind item on a popular industry blog. Then, a reputable financial columnist ran a piece questioning the leadership stability of the Varga Corporation in light of recent erratic behavior toward key international partners. The stock took a dip, not a crash, but a wobble. It was enough to make the sharks circle. Lucien did not take this lying down. He did exactly what a wounded predator does. He lashed out at the easiest prey he could find. On Tuesday afternoon, my mother received a notice of default. Lucien had called in the personal loans he had used to clear her debts. He wasn't asking for a payment plan. He was demanding the full sum of $2,400,000 within 48 hours, or he would initiate foreclosure proceedings on her condo and seize her assets. An hour later, a courier arrived at my apartment in Arlington. He handed me a cease and desist letter printed on thick, expensive bond paper. It accused me of defamation, corporate espionage, and breach of a non-disclosure agreement I had never signed. It threatened a lawsuit seeking damages in the tens of millions of dollars if I did not issue a public retraction and surrender all stolen intellectual property. He wanted to crush us. He wanted to make us so terrified of losing the little we had left that we would crawl back to him and beg for mercy. He underestimated us, again, on Thursday morning. We walked into the Varga Corporation headquarters. It was a glass tower that pierced the sky, a monument to ego. We were not there to beg. We were there for a meeting that Tessa Harrow had orchestrated with the precision of a military strike. She had sent a single email to Gideon Varga's personal counsel attached with a 3-minute audio file. The subject line read simply, "Settlement or exposure." The conference room was on the 45th floor. The view was spectacular, looking down on the city like a map of conquered territory. Gideon Varga sat at the head of the table. He looked older than he had at the party. The lines around his mouth were deeper, etched by the sudden realization that his legacy was fragile. Lucien sat next to him. He refused to look at us. He stared at a spot on the mahogany table. His jaw clenched so tight, I could see the muscle jumping. Across from them, sat the opposition. Me, Sloane, Dana, and Tessa Harrow, who looked entirely at home in the Shark Tank. "This is blackmail," Lucian spat, breaking the silence before anyone had even opened a folder. "You come here with secret recordings? You think a judge will let that stand?" "I think a judge will be very interested in the content of those recordings." "Lucienne," Tessa said, opening her laptop, "specifically the part where you admit to fraud regarding the Moreau contract, and the part where you threaten your fiancé's sister with professional ruin because she corrected your grammar." "We are not here to litigate the past," Gideon said, his voice cold and weary. "We are here to discuss terms. You want the debt forgiven? Fine, we can discuss a payment structure, but in exchange, we want the rights to the Harrow-Lewis protocols assigned to Varga Corp., and we want a non-disclosure agreement signed by all three of you." Today, he pushed a stack of papers across the table. It was a surrender treaty. He was offering us survival in exchange for our silence and my life's work. I didn't touch the papers. "No," I said. Gideon's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" "We are not signing an NDA," I said, "and I am certainly not assigning the rights to my work to this company. Not while he is running it." I pointed at Lucian. "You have no leverage here, Ivy," Gideon said, leaning forward. "You have a recording of a bad dinner party. I have a promissory note for $2 million and a team of lawyers who can keep you in court until you are drawing a pension. Do not overplay your hand." "I am not overplaying," I said. "I am just reading the rules you agreed to." I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a page from the Harrow-Lewis compliance protocols, the very document Lucian had tried to steal. "Clause 4.2, I said. "The ethical stability and conduct provision." Lucian looked up, confused. "What?" "The protocol isn't just a dictionary." "Lucian," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "It is a framework for liability. It dictates that any entity using the standard to secure cross-border contracts must demonstrate leadership stability and ethical conduct to ensure the enforceability of the terms. If the leadership is proven to be erratic, compromised, or engaged in acts of moral turpitude, the compliance certification is automatically voided." I paused, letting the words sink in. "Etienne Moreau knows this," I continued, "because he read the paper. If you sign a deal with the Moreau Consortium using my framework, and you remain CEO after what you did on Saturday, the contract is self-voiding. You would be signing a document that dissolves itself the moment the ink is dry." Gideon snatched the paper. He read it. His face went pale. "You built a morality clause into a translation standard?" Gideon asked, looking at me with a mixture of horror and grudging respect. "I built a protection clause against bad faith actors," I corrected. "It seems I was prescient." "This is ridiculous," Lucian stammered. We can use a different standard." "There is no other standard," Tessa cut in. "Not for the Eurozone expansion. Not on this timeline. You need the Harrow-Lewis framework, or you need 6 months to renegotiate the entire legal basis of the merger. And you don't have 6 months, do you? The liquidity crisis is real." The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed, sounding like the countdown of a bomb. Lucian looked at his father. He was waiting for Gideon to fix it. He was waiting for the bailout. Gideon Varga closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he didn't look at Lucian. He looked at me. "What do you want?" Gideon asked. "I want the debt erased," I said. "Not restructured, erased. Consider it a consulting fee for preventing you from committing international securities fraud." Gideon nodded once. "Done." "I want a public statement," I continued, "retracting the accusations of espionage. I want my professional reputation restored." "Fine," Gideon said. "And," I said, looking directly at Lucian, "I want him gone." Lucian slammed his hand on the table. "You cannot be serious. Dad, she is bluffing." "She is not bluffing, Lucian," Gideon said quietly. She is holding a royal flush, and you are holding a pair of twos. He steps down, I said. Effective immediately, he resigns for personal reasons, if he stays. I deny the license for the protocol. Moreau walks, the deal dies, the company collapses. Lucian stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. I built this deal. You cannot push me out of my own company. You didn't build it, Sloane said. Everyone turned to look at her. Sloane had been silent until now, sitting with her hands folded in her lap. She looked different today. The heavy makeup was gone. The designer dress was replaced by a simple blazer and jeans. She looked like herself again. You bought it, Sloane said, her voice calm and clear. Just like you tried to buy me. Just like you tried to buy my mother. You think owning things makes you a builder, Lucian, but it just makes you a collector. She reached into her bag. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a small velvet box. She slid it across the table. It stopped right in front of Lucian. We are done, Sloane said. The ring is in there. I don't want it. I don't want the house. I don't want the clothes. I want you to stay away from my family forever. Lucian stared at the box. He looked at Sloane, really looked at her, and realized that his checkbook had no power here. He couldn't buy his way out of this room. He looked at Gideon. Dad? Gideon Vargas stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He looked at his son with eyes that were no longer angry, just cold and final. We will prepare the press release regarding your resignation within the hour, Gideon said. It will cite health reasons. You will retain your shares, but you will have no voting power and no operational role. You are done. Lucian. Lucian opened his mouth to argue, but the fight had gone out of him. He slumped back into his chair. A man made of straw collapsing in the wind. Gideon turned to me. My legal team will draft the settlement agreement regarding the debt and the license. We will send it to Ms. Harrow by end of day. See that you do, I said. We stood up. We didn't shake hands. There was no need. The transaction was complete. We walked out of the conference room, leaving Lucian Vargas sitting alone at the long mahogany table, staring at the velvet box that contained the symbol of everything he had lost. The elevator ride down was silent. My mother leaned against the wall. Her eyes closed. She looked exhausted, but she also looked lighter. The crushing weight of the $2 million was gone. She was broke. Yes, she would have to sell the condo. She would have to move. But she was free. I am sorry, Dana whispered, not opening her eyes. I am so sorry. Girls. Sloane reached out and took her hand. We know, Mom. We figure it out. We always do. When we stepped out into the lobby, Tessa checked her phone. You have an email, she said to me. Who is it from? I asked. The Ravenport Institute for Language and Policy, she said, a smile spreading across her face. It seems Etienne Moreau made a phone call. They are offering you a position. Director of Historical Linguistics. They want you to lead a new division focusing on ethical semantics in international law. I stopped walking. I stared at her. The Ravenport Institute was a fiction, or at least, it had been a dream. It was the pinnacle of my field. It was the place where the work I cared about actually mattered. They are offering funding, Tessa read. Full grant support to finish the research you abandoned 3 years ago. I felt a lump form in my throat. I looked at the glass doors leading out to the street. For 3 years, I had convinced myself that my life was over, that I was just a footnote in someone else's story. I had accepted the role of the invisible sister, but the invisible sister didn't exist anymore. She had burned up in the atmosphere of the Marrow House, and someone else had walked out of the fire. Director, I tasted the word. It sounded like the truth. We walked outside. The air in D.C. was cold, biting, but it felt incredibly fresh. It was evening now, and the streetlights were humming to life. Sloane stood beside me on the sidewalk. She took a deep breath, watching her breath plume in the chill air. She looked at the courthouse building across the street. its pillars illuminated against the night sky. "So," Sloane said, "we are homeless, we are broke, and I'm technically single for the first time since I was 22. "We are not homeless," I said. "We have the apartment in Arlington. It is small, and it smells like old paper. But it is ours." "I like old paper," Sloane said. She turned to me, and her eyes were bright. "You saved us, Ivy. You really saved us." "No," I said, wrapping my arm around her shoulders. "I just reminded him of the rules." "You saved yourself when you gave the ring back." Sloane laughed. It was a real laugh, loud and uninhibited. "Did you see his face? When you brought up the claws? He looked like he had swallowed a lemon whole. He looked like a man who used the subjunctive mood when he should have used the indicative," I said. We stood there for a moment, just breathing. The traffic moved past us. A river of red and white lights. The city was moving on, indifferent to the drama that had just played out in the tower above us. But we were different. We were standing on solid ground. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the building behind us. I saw a woman in a navy dress, standing tall, surrounded by the people she loved. I wasn't hiding in the corner. I wasn't fetching coffee. I wasn't waiting for permission to speak. The real win wasn't humiliating Lucian Varga. It wasn't the job offer. It wasn't even the cleared debt. The real win was the feeling in my chest. It was the quiet, steady rhythm of a heart that refused to be invisible ever again. "Come on," I said to my sister and my mother. "Let's go home. I have a lot of books I need to unpack." We turned and walked into the night, not as victims, and not as conquerors, but simply as three women who owned their own voices, and who finally, after a long, dark winter, were ready to speak. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening on your commute, at the gym, or maybe relaxing at home? Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. If you enjoyed Ivy's journey, please subscribe to the Jane Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people.